Allow me to share my story of growing up often overlooked, hidden in the shadow of my elder sister. My name is Etta, and my sister Teresa, 3 years my senior, seemed to bask in the spotlight of our parents' attention. It was as though she was an only child. Every new purchase, whether the latest phone, trendy shoes, or a high-tech laptop, first belonged to Teresa. When she upgraded, her old possessions became mine. Our family wasn't struggling financially. It just seemed that my needs were an afterthought to my parents. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was the one person who noticed the disparity. Each visit, she would scrutinize my hand-me-downs with a look of displeasure, as if she had bitten into something bitter. In those moments, she would discreetly slip me an envelope with money. Buy something special for yourself, she'd insist. Something that's truly yours. My grandmother wasn't just wealthy, she was also genuinely attentive. Unlike my parents, she took an interest in my life, asking about school, my friends, and my hobbies, those everyday things that parents typically inquire about but mine overlooked. By the time I was 16, my patience had worn thin. I was tired of being invisible in my own home, of always wearing Teresa's discarded clothes, of feeling like a ghost within the family. Determined to carve out my path, I secured a job at a local cafe. It was humble work, taking orders, manning the register, and cleaning up. But every dollar I earned was empowering. It was mine, untainted by the shadow of hand-me-downs. Working for myself had its unexpected rewards. I found satisfaction in earning my keep, in knowing that the things I bought were truly mine, without the lingering sense of indebtedness to Teresa's leftovers. My grandmother understood this shift in me. She would often visit the cafe, watching me with pride as she sipped her coffee, seeing me thrive on my terms. Teresa's 19th birthday marked a grand celebration of her passage into adulthood. My parents spared no expense, securing a lavish venue, gourmet caterers, and inviting a throng of relatives. I spent the morning setting up, watching as my mother painstakingly arranged every detail. By evening, the venue buzzed with guests, and Teresa glided among them, radiant in a brand-new dress, receiving accolades like royalty at her coronation. Meanwhile, I stood on the sidelines, clad in my finest hand-me-down, trying to fade into the background. The highlight of the evening was when my father stood to toast Teresa, his face alight with pride. As he spoke, extolling her virtues and achievements, I couldn't help but feel even more like the forgotten child, overshadowed even on such a grand stage. At the height of the celebration, my father stood up with a gleam in his eyes, making everyone's attention pivot towards him. Beside him, my mother, practically radiating excitement, chimed in. As you all know, Teresa has been an outstanding student throughout her life. I nearly rolled my eyes at the familiar narrative. My father, swelling with pride, announced, "We are thrilled to let everyone know that Teresa will be attending Preston University this coming fall." The room burst into applause. Preston was the kind of elite private college where tuition alone could dwarf the cost of an average home. "We've been saving for this since she was a little girl," Dad continued, his chest puffed out. "It hasn't been easy, but we believe nothing is too good for our Teresa." It was then that Grandma stood up, her expression stern in a way I recognized all too well, the look that said she had seen enough. "That is wonderful news," she began, her voice slicing through the now muted applause. "I'm truly happy for Teresa. However, I must ask, have you also set aside a similar fund for Etta's college education?" The room fell into a palpable silence. My parents looked like they'd been caught off guard, their faces turning to their shoes. My mother stumbled over her words, her cheeks reddening. "Oh, well, there's still time. Etta hasn't finished high school yet." But Grandma cut her off. "That's not what I asked, Sandra." Trying to maintain a casual tone, my mom replied, "Well, to be honest, Etta isn't exactly college material like Teresa. Her grades aren't. She might just continue working at the cafe after she graduates." The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. I felt a sting of humiliation, but before I could react, Grandma was already pulling out my most recent report card from her purse, the one with straight A's and an A+ in chemistry. "These grades," she challenged, holding it up for all to see. These are the grades of someone who isn't college material? The ones you'd know about if you ever asked your youngest about her school? Silence engulfed the room as Grandma listed my grades. My parents' faces morphed from embarrassment to shock. We didn't know, my dad murmured sheepishly. Exactly. Grandma snapped back, her voice sharp as broken glass. You don't know because you're too focused on Teresa to realize your other daughter exists. Mom, please. My mother attempted to interject, but Grandma was relentless. No, you need to listen, she continued. Now tell me, why haven't you saved for Edda's education? And don't lie to me, Sandra. I raised you better than that. Under the weight of scrutiny, my dad confessed, we used all our savings on Teresa's tuition. The collective gasp from the relatives was like a physical blow, making me wish I could vanish. But Grandma wasn't finished. So, you've left nothing for your younger daughter, she said, shaking her head in disdain. Well then, I will pay for Edda's college education. Every single penny. Because it seems I'm the only adult here who insists on treating these girls equally. Torn between gratitude towards my grandmother and a desire to escape the overwhelming tension, I sat frozen. Teresa, meanwhile, stared down at her cake as if it contained the answers to the universe. After the debacle at Teresa's birthday party, our home morphed into a cold, silent fortress. My parents seemed to harbor the notion that I had engineered the entire episode, manipulating Grandma to reveal their partiality. As if in response to their unspoken accusations, an icy chill settled over our interactions. That fall, Teresa left for Preston University, and with her departure, any remaining warmth in our house seemed to vanish. My parents drifted through the days like specters, barely acknowledging my presence. Occasionally, I'd catch them giving me looks that blended resentment with shame, as if I were the living reminder of their disgrace. I continued my routine, working at the cafe and maintaining strong grades, existing in the echoing quiet of our house. Time moved slowly, but eventually my high school graduation approached. I was accepted into State University, a respectable institution, though not as prestigious as Preston. It wasn't just a school to me. It was a portal to freedom. My grandmother's face lit up when I showed her the acceptance letter, her pride in stark contrast to my parents' lukewarm acknowledgement. They attended my graduation ceremony, yet they were as distant as strangers, offering nothing more than a cursory card and a generic congratulation before reverting to discussions about Teresa's achievements. College became my sanctuary. I lived in the dorms and spent breaks at Grandma's house. Occasionally, I visited my parents, maintaining a superficial connection. These visits were predictably scripted. I would sit, and they would fill the air with tales of Teresa's latest successes, her graduation with honors, her high-profile job, her relationship with Gabriel, a well-positioned financier likely to become her fiancé. I'd listen silently, my accomplishments unasked for and unspoken. During these updates, I'd offer nothing more than nods and smiles, letting their words fade into the background. Why bother sharing my own successes or dreams? They hadn't shown interest before. There was no reason to think they would now. Meanwhile, my father would glowingly add details about Gabriel's affluent family and their booming real estate business, painting a picture of a future that was seemingly perfect. In those moments, I felt my grandmother's eyes on me, her gaze filled with understanding. She knew why I remained silent, why I allowed them to orbit around Teresa without interruption. The battle for recognition had lost its appeal long ago. How are your classes really going? Grandma would ask once we were alone, her voice warm with genuine curiosity. I would open up about my studies, my projects, and my aspirations. She engaged with every detail, offering insights and encouragement. After graduating from State University, I secured a position at a reputable marketing firm. My hard work had finally translated into a tangible success. I had my apartment, a comfortable income, and a career trajectory that filled me with pride. As I established my independent life, the contrast between my world and the one centered around Teresa grew sharper. Yet, with Grandma's support, I navigated these two realities, cherishing the freedom to build a future on my terms. Life was progressing splendidly for me, defined by a thrilling sense of autonomy from my parents' orbit. However, when Teresa's wedding rolled around, my parents truly outdid themselves. They hosted a lavish affair at a historic mansion adorned with pristine gardens, complete with a string quartet and a gourmet four-course meal, even featuring an elaborate ice sculpture. I later discovered they had financed this grand spectacle with a $500,000 loan. Despite my internal reservations about their financial decisions, I kept my opinions to myself and focused on celebrating my sister's joyous day. Teresa was radiant, and her husband Gabriel seemed genuinely decent. A couple of years later, it was my turn to plan a wedding. Connor, my partner of 4 years, proposed, and I was ecstatic. We organized a modest engagement celebration at my favorite restaurant with our nearest and dearest, including, of course, my beloved grandmother. The evening was unfolding beautifully until Grandma rose to speak. Her eyes had that familiar, significant glint, the same one from Teresa's 19th birthday party. Addressing the room warmly, she then turned pointedly to my parents. "Sandra, Jefferson, you orchestrated such a beautiful wedding for Teresa. I trust you're planning something just as splendid for Etta." The room fell into an awkward silence. My parents squirmed under Grandma's unwavering gaze. My mother, managing a strained smile, replied, "Of course, we want both our daughters to have beautiful weddings." Trying to deflect from the tension, I quickly changed the topic, but Grandma's words lingered, altering the atmosphere. A few days later, my mom invited me over to discuss the wedding. Reluctantly, I agreed, opting to go alone despite Connor's offer to join. Over dinner, my mom eagerly asked about my vision for the wedding. I explained that Connor and I envisioned a small, intimate gathering of around 72 people, with a budget we had carefully planned at $33,000 from our savings. To my surprise, my mom looked appalled at the modest sum. "Absolutely not. That's not acceptable at all. We'll cover the wedding costs just like we did for Teresa's. Don't worry about the budget. Choose whatever you like," she insisted. I was stunned. After years of feeling like an afterthought, my parents were suddenly eager to finance a lavish wedding for me. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. For the first time, I felt recognized as a true daughter, and I cautiously allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Grandma's persistent interventions had resonated with them. The wedding day itself was a dream. It took place at a picturesque lakeside resort, with a ceremony set up near the tranquil water. Every detail, from the stunning floral arrangements to the exquisite cuisine, was perfect. The atmosphere was joyous, and it seemed everyone was having a fantastic time. As I looked around at the beautifully orchestrated scene, I hoped this marked a genuine shift in my relationship with my parents, a closing of the gap that had long defined our interactions. My parents genuinely seemed to enjoy the wedding, mingling with the guests and displaying a semblance of pride that felt authentic for once. Grandma, with a twinkle in her eyes, pulled me aside during the reception to express her happiness. "This is exactly what you deserve, sweetheart," she whispered as she embraced me warmly. "I'm so glad your parents stepped up for your special day." She even sought out my parents to thank them for hosting such a wonderful event. Leaving the reception, Connor and I were on cloud 9, ready to relish our honeymoon in Hawaii, blissfully detached from everything but each other and our new life together. However, the reality came crashing down shortly after our return. While unpacking, an email notification caught my attention. The subject line read simply, "Wedding expenses." Expecting perhaps a summary of the costs for curiosity's sake, I opened the email only to find an itemized bill totaling $165,000 attached with a note from my mom stating, "We trust you'll handle this promptly. Payment details attached." My hands trembled as disbelief turned to shock. This couldn't be real. Connor came over at the sound of my choked call. His expression shifted from confusion to outrage as he read the email. "They're billing us after insisting on paying for the wedding themselves? This must be some kind of mistake," he said, though his voice betrayed his doubt. But it was no mistake. The bill was very real, and so was their expectation for us to pay. That evening, we sat together, staring at our bank accounts, trying to grasp the implications. "We have the money," I said hollowly, referring to the savings intended for our future home. Connor suggested we speak with my parents first, hoping for some explanation, but deep down, I felt the bitter truth. There was no misunderstanding. This was just another chapter in the same old story where they built me up only to let me down, except this time, they had waited until after the wedding. With a heavy heart, I wrote the check for $165,000, watching our dreams for a home dissipate with each stroke of my pen. Sealing the envelope, I felt not just betrayal, but a stern resolve hardening within me. "I'm done," I declared to Connor as we dropped the envelope into the mailbox. "I'm done trying, done hoping. Just done." "What about your grandmother?" he asked softly, concerned. "Should we tell her?" I paused, the weight of the situation bearing down on me. "I can't," I admitted. "She was so proud at the wedding, so happy. I can't crush her with this." That night, sleep eluded me as I replayed every sign I had ignored. Their sudden generosity, their insistence on an extravagant wedding, their dismissal of my budget. I had wanted so badly to believe they had changed, and in my desire, I had walked right into their trap. Just as life began to settle into a new normal, Melanie, a family friend known for her invasive cheerfulness and inedible fruitcakes, appeared unannounced one Sunday afternoon. With a bright smile and a cake in hand, she breezed past me into the living room, her presence a stark reminder of the social facade my parents continued to maintain. "Etta, darling," she chirped, setting the tone for what I anticipated would be an awkward encounter. It had been a while since I'd seen Aunt Melanie, but as usual, she just appeared on our doorstep unannounced, claiming she was just in the neighborhood, and wanted to see how married life was treating me. Aunt Melanie, my father's sister, was the family's self-appointed news anchor, always eager to scoop up any tidbit of gossip. Her visits were rarely brief, often felt like she was there to collect stories rather than genuinely catch up. "Can I get you some coffee?" I offered, bracing myself for what I knew would be more than just a quick chat. "Oh, yes, dear. Then we can catch up properly," she responded, settling into our couch with the air of someone preparing for a lengthy stay. Once seated, she dove right in. "I haven't seen your parents in ages. How are they doing?" I busied myself at the coffee maker, delaying my response. "I wouldn't know," I finally answered. "Wouldn't know," she echoed, her pitch climbing in surprise. "What do you mean, wouldn't know? They're your parents." "I don't talk to them anymore," I said plainly, setting her coffee down in front of her. "But why?" She leaned forward, her eyes lighting up at the scent of fresh gossip. "They gave you such a beautiful wedding. Everyone's still talking about it." "I'd rather not discuss it," I stated firmly. 3 days after her visit, my phone exploded with notifications. Aunt Melanie had taken to Facebook, broadcasting her version of our conversation in a post laden with disappointment and judgment. It breaks my heart to see how ungrateful some children can be these days. "Just visited my niece who told me she's cut off contact with her parents, the same parents who just threw her a gorgeous wedding. No respect for the family anymore. Parents sacrifice everything, and this is how they're repaid. Ungrateful children. Heartbroken. Family values." The comments poured in instantly. Distant relatives, who I hadn't interacted with in years, suddenly became vocal critics of my life, labeling me ungrateful, spoiled, and disrespectful. Even those who rarely engaged with family matters were now demanding explanations, tagging me in aggressive responses. But what struck me the hardest was my mother's comment under Melanie's post. "It's true what they say, you never really know your children. Some show gratitude and appreciation for everything their parents do for them. Others, well, you can certainly tell the difference between my eldest and youngest daughters." Disappointed mother. After hours of stewing over the situation, staring at my mother's words which felt like sharp jabs to my heart, something within me snapped. "Enough," I declared aloud, startling Connor in the process. I was done being portrayed as the villain in their narrative. Trembling, I retrieved the check I had written for $165,000 from my filing cabinet, took a photo showing the amount clearly, and began drafting my own Facebook post. Since everyone seems to have an opinion about my relationship with my parents, let me share the real story. Yes, they threw me a beautiful wedding. No, I didn't ask for it. In fact, I had planned a modest celebration with a $33,000 budget, which I intended to pay for myself. They insisted on a grander affair, promising to cover the costs, just like they did for Teresa. 1 week after the wedding, they sent me this bill for $165,000, 5 times my original budget. Here's the check I had to write them, using every penny of our house down payment savings. That's why I don't talk to my parents anymore. I hit post before I could second-guess myself, attaching the photo of the check. The reaction was swift and dramatic. The same relatives who had called me ungrateful were now expressing their shock, and the tide of comments under Aunt Melanie's original post shifted. Many now called for its removal, shaken by the revelation of the full story. My phone rang just as I was setting the table for dinner. It was Grandma. I could hear the strain in her voice as she asked, "Etta, is it true what you posted about the wedding bill?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. I explained how Mom and Dad had dismissed my wishes for a simple wedding, insisted on an extravagant affair, and then slapped us with a staggering $165,000 bill right after our honeymoon. I recounted how Connor and I had to use our house down payment to cover the unexpected expense. As I spoke, there was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. When I finished, Grandma finally spoke, her voice filled with a mix of anger and resolve. "Those miserable, selfish people," she sighed. "Listen to me, Etta. You focus on taking care of yourself and Connor. I'll handle your parents." "Grandma, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interjected firmly. "I've watched them treat you like a second-class citizen your entire life. But this is a new low, even for them." Her tone hardened. "Don't worry about them anymore. I'll handle it." After we hung up, I spent the next hour methodically blocking my parents on every communication platform. Phone, email, social media. I was done with their games, done with their manipulation, done with hoping they would change. A week after my social media post, I was in the middle of making dinner when I heard an aggressive knock at the door. Connor was working late, so I was alone when I opened it to find my mother, her face red with fury. "How dare you?" she shouted as she barged past me into the house. "How dare you go running to your grandmother with your lies?" I stood my ground, my voice steady. "I didn't lie about anything. You sent me a bill. I paid for it. And then I showed everyone the truth when you tried to make me look bad. You've ruined everything." She was almost hysterical now. "Your grandmother changed her will because of you. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Her words were a jolt, but I kept calm. "What are you talking about?" "She's leaving almost everything to you." Mom's voice cracked. "The house, her savings, everything. Teresa gets some small amounts and your father and I get nothing. And it's all your fault." I processed this new information as my mother continued her tirade. "We had it all planned out," she ranted. "We took out a second mortgage for Teresa's wedding, but it was fine because we were going to pay it off with the inheritance. Your grandmother was supposed to split everything equally." Suddenly, it all clicked into place. "That's why you insisted on paying for my wedding," I said slowly. "You thought you'd get the money back from Grandma's inheritance anyway." "Of course, that's why. But now look what you've done. We're drowning in debt, and you've turned your grandmother against us." I couldn't help but laugh, which only fueled her anger. "Well, you just got $165,000 from me for my wedding. That should help with your debt." Mom's face flushed even darker. "We already spent that money, but that's not the point. You need to fix this. Go to your grandmother, tell her we've made up, that it was all a big misunderstanding." "No," I replied, the calmness in my voice belying the firmness of my decision. "What do you mean no?" "You owe us this." But as I looked at her, something settled over me, an unshakable resolve. "I don't owe you anything," I told her. "I'm done." This was the moment I truly freed myself from the burdens of their expectations and manipulations. As she stormed out, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, knowing I had finally closed that chapter of my life for good. I firmly told my mother, "I don't owe you anything, not anymore. Your financial problems are exactly that, yours. I'm not going to lie to Grandma to help you access the money you were never entitled to in the first place." Before she could hurl another insult, I walked over to the door, opened it, and gestured for her to leave. When she hesitated, I gently but firmly pushed her out of the apartment, closed the door, and locked it. She continued to scream and pound on the door for about 15 more minutes before she finally left. The next day, Teresa called, her voice full of accusation. "How could you do this to them?" she demanded. "They gave you everything, just like they gave me. And this is how you repay them?" "They didn't give me anything, Teresa. They sent me a bill," I replied. "They're your parents. They've sacrificed so much for us." "No," I corrected her. "They sacrificed for you. I was just the backup plan for their retirement fund." Teresa called me cruel and heartless before abruptly hanging up. Just like that, I realized I had lost my sister as well. But strangely, I was okay with it. I continued to see Grandma regularly. She would come over for dinner every Sunday, and we talked almost daily over the phone. Occasionally, people would ask if I missed my family. I always told them the truth. I missed the family I wished I had, not the family that actually existed. Over time, I've learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close the door to toxic relationships, even when those relationships are with your parents. Standing up for myself had cost me my relationship with my parents and sister, but it had also freed me from a lifetime of manipulation and disappointment. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was one that allowed me to live a life defined by my values and truth, surrounded by those who genuinely care and support me.